There's been an important series of developments underway in our judiciary today. The first day in the Constitutional Court for the new Deputy Chief Justice Mandisa Maya. She takes office for the first time today. At the same time, we now need to start the process to appoint a new President of the Supreme Court of Appeal. Meanwhile, that court still has to provide absolute clarity on whether or not Oscar Pistorius, you may remember the para-athlete, whether he can be released after serving a lengthy period of his term behind bars for killing his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp. Mbekezeli Benjamin joins us from Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, good afternoon to you. In a way, this is an important moment. It's the first time we've ever had a woman Deputy Chief Justice. It means there's now a change in the Constitutional Court. How do you view what's happening today?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Today is a monumental day in the history of South Africa, and particularly the legal history of our country. We are, of course, welcoming the first woman to be appointed as the Deputy Chief Justice of the country, the so-called second in command in our judiciary. So it is an important day, milestone occasion, and I think it sets the tone for what is to come in terms of our judiciary and particularly the leadership of our judiciary.
In other words, you're expecting that we'll have more female, not just Chief Justice for the first time perhaps in the next couple of years, but also as judges present in various courts?
Yes, absolutely. So right now as a country, we stand with a situation where there is no woman who's heading up a court as I speak to you right now. There's no permanent judge who's holding a leadership position. So we are hoping that this is the low point and we can not go any lower than this. So that means there needs to be a concerted effort from the President, from the Chief Justice, from the JSC to ensure that they bring in more women in the leadership core of our judiciary.
There's another question around the Constitutional Court, and I mean, when I say balance, I don't mean in terms of identity or anything like that. I mean jurisprudentially, in other words, judgments. You get some judges that are seen as executive-minded. You get some who are seen as progressive. You get some that are seen as interested in particular ways, and they can change a balance on a court, which can be really quite important in the future. Does the appointment of Judge Maya in any way change the balance on any of the sort of judicial philosophies that we could expect? Any of the ways in which we may start to see judgments moving in terms of a court because she's now joining it?
Yes, that is an important point that you bring up, Stephen, because at the end of the day, whatever the judge looks like, of course it is important, but what is more important is that the judge can be able to do their job, and they do it very well. So with Justice Maya, she comes in with a really rich experience at appellate level. So what we need from the Constitutional Court is for the court to produce the kinds of judgments that will give guidance to the courts that are lower down. So she comes with a wealth of appellate experience, but she's sort of created some sort of a niche in terms of understanding customary law issues and writing in a language that a lot of people in South Africa can understand. She was one of the first judges to write. She is, in fact, the first judge to write a judgment in isiXhosa. She's written two now, and she is working on a third, as I understand it. So she brings with that too, which is important in terms of the legitimacy of our courts and the law speaking to a broader group of South Africans than only those who can speak English and Afrikaans.
We may be less than a decade away from the Constitutional Court issuing its first judgment in a language other than English. We also have to find a new president for the Supreme Court of Appeal. The Deputy Judge President is Kgola Petse. I think most people probably only saw him sort of on TV during the televised hearings for the position of Chief Justice. Is he the front runner to be the new Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, or do you think there are other candidates?
Well, I heard this morning in the news that there are a bunch of candidates that are being considered, and Justice Petse is one of them. Of course, it would make sense for the deputy to assume the substantive leadership position, but there are certain qualities, I think, that may discount him in the sense that he's very close to retirement. I think he retires in late 2024, if not early 2025. So he would have a limited time to stay in the position. But also, like I said earlier, it is now time to to bring on more women in a leadership position. So it would make perfect sense to have an experienced woman in that position. And one of the candidates that was spoken about was Justice Mahube Mulimela, who was the first judge president of the Free State High Court. She's the chancellor of the Central University of Technology in the Free State. So she brings with her a lot of wealth in terms of leadership, and her being at the Supreme Court of Appeal for such a long time, she would also be familiar with how that court operates.
There's also a bigger question. You don't want to take a woman judge president from the Supreme Court of Appeal, move that person to the Constitutional Court, and suddenly find that you have men leading the Supreme Court of Appeal for the next 10 years.
Well, I don't think we should look at it as crudely as that, as simply just men and women. I think it's important to also look at the kinds of qualities that these candidates bring. I did mention that Justice Mulimela was the head of High Court, for example, and she brings leadership experience with that. I wouldn't be upset if Justice Pete was considered as a leader of that court, because he has also been in the leadership position. There are other judges like Justice Ponan, who's the most senior judge, in fact, in that court. He would also do a tremendous job. Several other judges that we can bring up. So I think the most important thing that we must focus on is the qualities that the different judges bring, and of course their identity and the representation that they bring is also an important factor in the mix of the qualities that we consider.
Mbekezeli, I don't know how closely you've been following the Oscar Pistorius case. There's a strange dynamic where you have a sentence that was issued by the Supreme Court of Appeal. Then there was a sort of slight change to it. I don't know what the phrase politicians always use as a clarification. Then correctional services say they don't accept, or they don't believe that the interpretation, that the judgment of the sentence is correct and that he can't be released now. I can't recall a debate around when someone's sentence ends in this way before. Are we going to see more court action over someone who's been to court many times?
Well, I think it's important to first emphasize that the order of court is final, and no one can second guess or try to interpret themselves out of the enforcement of that court order. That is absolutely important. But if there is any debate or disagreement about the meaning of a court judgment, then the parties must go back to the court and seek a clarification of that judgment. We've seen it in many, many cases before, and I don't think it would be unusual if it were to happen in this case. But of course, it's something that is to be discouraged and avoided, perhaps. But I don't see anything wrong with it necessarily.
And Mbekezeli Benjamin from Judges Matter, really appreciate the time and the clarity. Thank you very much. Indeed, an important day in our courts.